Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today, inshallah, we shall continue our discussion about some basic terms in geometry. And today, we're going to talk all about angles. I've drawn for you over here an angle, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. There's some basic terminology as it relates to the angle itself. This point right here, the elbow of the angle, so to speak, it's given a name, and it's called the vertex. So vertex is right there. And then these, they're called the sides of the angle. So we have a vertex, and we have two sides of an angle. Now, angles are also given names in geometry. And if you recall, in geometry, precision is very important. So I've already redrawn this particular angle. And I'm going to label some points over here. I'm going to call this point A, and I'm going to give the vertex the name point B, and here point C. So I have 3 points here on this angle that I have created. And I can name this angle in several different ways. I can call this angle ABC, like this. Another name for the same angle would be angle CBA. So one way of naming an angle is just to pick 3 points, one on one side, the vertex, and another point on the other side of the angle, and just kind of trace out the angle like this, either this way or this way. So here's 2 different ways of naming the same angle ABC or angle CBA. Another way of naming the same angle, in fact, is simply to call it angle B, like this. So just use the vertex and just say this is angle B. And that's perfectly all right. And finally, there's another way of naming angles, and that is if you can just put like a number over here, and we call this angle 1. So another way of naming the same angle would be angle 1. Okay? Now, that's easy enough, you say. There are different ways of naming same angles. Now, I'm going to draw another angle over here, like this, maybe a little bit bigger, like that. And I'm going to draw a second angle inside of an angle, so kind of like this. The first thing is, how many angles are there? Well, there are actually 3 angles. First, there's this big angle right here, correct? And then there are 2 smaller angles like this. So there are, in fact, 3 angles over here. Okay, so let's label some points here. That's point A, that's point B, that's point C, and I'm going to call this one point D, and let's put another point here, why not? Let's call this one point E. Now here, you have to be more precise when naming the angles, because there are multiple angles with the same vertex B, right? In fact, there are 3 angles here that have the same vertex. That's point B. Observe again that points here are all labeled with capital or uppercase letters by convention. So you can't say angle B because, well, what do you mean by that? Which angle are you talking about? So in this case, that is, where there are multiple angles with the same vertex, you have to be more precise in how you name angles. So let's name the 3 angles that we have set. The big angle, that one, there's multiple ways of naming that one. Okay, so let's name that one like this. So the big angle is angle ABC. I'm tracing it out basically like this. Now, point E is on this side of the angle, right? Right here, point E, I mean. Point E is over here. So another way of naming the same angle is angle EBC, because that also traces out the same angle, doesn't it? Okay, so there are 2 ways of naming this big angle. Now, we can't name this big angle angle B anymore. We can't use this way because there are multiple angles that use the same vertex. Okay, so there are 2 ways here. And then you can say CBE is another way of naming the same angle as well. All right? Now, to name the smaller angles, this one and this one, we just pick 3 points that trace out the angle. So the smaller angle, for example, could be angle ABD. That's this one over here. And another way of saying that, another way of saying that is ABD. Another way of saying that is EBD. That's angle EBD. So this little symbol is used to represent angles. So there are two ways of naming that particular angle. And this angle, therefore, can also be named, and it can be named thus: angle DBC, or tracing it the other way around, you can say that's angle CBD, like this. Okay? So when you have more than one angle that stem or emanate from the same vertex, you have to be more careful or more precise as to which angle you're talking about. Now, if you wanted to name these angles using numbers, numerical values, numbers, so you can say this is angle 1 and this is angle 2. Those are the smaller angles. And if you wanted to give a number to the whole angle, you can say the whole angle like this is angle 3 or something like that. But you have to be very careful in defining those angles, just to avoid all confusion. But you can name here conveniently angle 1 and 2. So you can say angle 1 and angle 2 when they add it together to give you the big angle like this. Okay. Now, you appreciate that angles are basically two rays put together. Here's one ray with its endpoint, right? And if you attach another ray to it like this, then you have an angle. So angles are basically two rays put together at the vertex here by their endpoints. Now, angles can be measured. If you recall, here's an angle, and I'm going to say this is 120 degrees like this. All right? And I'm going to call this angle M right here. And I can say angle M is 120 degrees in its measure. The way I express that, I say M, the measure of angle M, capital M, is equal to 120 degrees like this. So I use this little m to represent or denote the words measure. Okay, like this. So if I say I have an angle K, whose measure is 45 degrees, I don't write it like that. Okay, that would not be a proper way of writing it. It would not be precise. So this is angle K equals 45 degrees. No, the measure of angle K is equal to 45 degrees. So when you're talking about angle measures, you have to put that little m in beforehand. Okay, so measure of angle K is 45 degrees. And if you wanted to draw that, and you draw it like this, approximately, it's going to be like that. Now, angle K. Now here, you notice we only have one alphabet in naming this angle. So that must, therefore, be the vertex, because you use the vertex as a reference point for naming angles. Correct? So this is angle K, and this is 45 degrees. Now, I don't know for sure if that's 45 degrees. I kind of just drew it, right? But it doesn't matter. If I say it's 45 degrees, it's assumed that it's 45 degrees. In the visual appearance of the way things are drawn in geometry is not as important as what it is claimed to be, as what it's said to be. So if I say this is 45 degrees, you don't have to get measuring device to measure the angles to make sure it's 45 degrees or not. We're going to have to assume and take it for face value that it is 45 degrees. So measure of angle K is 45 degrees. And if you wanted to draw it out, you can draw it out like this. All right? Okay. Now I have two angles over here. This one like this. I'm going to draw another angle like this. And let's call this one angle 1. And the other one, we'll call it angle 2. So this is angle 1, and this is angle 2. And it so happens that the measure of angle 1 is 30 degrees, and the measure of angle 2 is also 30 degrees, correct? That's what I'm saying there. So in other words, they have the same measure. If two angles have the same measure, they are said to be congruent. Here, we say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Now, observe that we use this symbol to say equal, as we have said before, and we use this symbol to say they are congruent. Now, we say that the angle measures are equal. See, the angle measures are equal, but we say that the angles themselves are congruent. See, the concept of congruency is a little bit beyond the angle measure. In other words, when we say two things are congruent, it means we can take this one thing and put it right on top of each other, and it will fit like a glove right on top of each other, like that. So these two angles have the same measure, therefore they are said to be congruent angles. Okay? So two angles are congruent if their angle measures are congruent. All right, so what have you learned so far? I suggested that an angle has a vertex and two sides, and you can use points on the either side of an angle and the vertex to name the angle, and there are multiple ways of doing that depending on how many points you're given. We can use the vertex itself to name the angle if there's only one angle that comes from the vertex, or we can use a number like this and put a little number like that to name the angle. If there are multiple angles that come from the same vertex, we have to be more precise in naming the angles to avoid confusion. I suggested that you measure angles over here like this and use the little m here to denote the word measure. So when we have something like this, we say the measure of angle K is 45 degrees, like this. And I suggested that two angles are congruent if their angle measures are equal. So measure of angle 1 is equal to 30 degrees. Measure of angle 2 is equal to 30 degrees. Therefore, that's 3 dot means therefore, angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Now, if you wanted to suggest that two angles are congruent, right? If you want to suggest that two angles are congruent, what we do is we put a little tick mark like this in the angle to say that they are the same. We put the same tick mark, so you can go like two of them, and now we know those two angles are congruent, okay? Or you can go like this, or you can put two tick marks like that, and that suggests that whichever angles you're talking about, they are going to be congruent, okay? So that's the concept of congruent angles. Just to make sure we understand this, I'm going to draw out an angle over here, and I'm going to draw another ray right smack in the middle of it like this. And I'm going to put these lines over here like that. Now here I'm suggesting that these two angles here, let's label them. Let's call them 1 and 2. I'm suggesting by my picture that angle 1 and angle 2 are congruent. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Or I could just say the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2. Well, how do I know this? Because I put those little tick mark, the curly marks inside to denote that those two angles are congruent. Okay? Now, there's one angle that I'm sure you're very familiar with, and that's this angle over here. This is a 90-degree angle that I've drawn. And if you recall, 90-degree angles are called right angles. So this is a right angle. All right? And right angle, 90-degree angles, and we use this particular symbol to denote that that's 90-degree angles. So when we draw like this, like a square box over here, right, at the elbow of the angle, then that denotes that this is a right angle. So I don't even have to tell you that this is a right angle if I just show you this. Then you must appreciate that we're talking about a right angle. All right? Now, there's another thing. So I'm going to draw another right angle over here, like this. And then I'm going to create two other angles. I'm just going to use the same vertex like this. All right. Now, if you're just given this, you don't know if this blue angle, the big blue angle, is a right angle. But if I give you this, then you know that this big angle over here is a right angle. Now, to name these properly, I'm going to have, because I have several angles over here, I'm going to have to use more precise language. Let's label some of these points like this. So, angle ABC, the big angle here, is a right angle. Okay? And you can use this symbol if you wanted to over here. Although I kind of jumbled that symbol over there, didn't I? Okay? So here, you can say it's a right angle like that. So, and then I have two other smaller angles here. Let's call them angle 1 and angle 2. Now, if you add up the measures of angle 1 and 2, right, they have to add up to 90 degrees, right? So, angle 1 and angle 2, they are called complementary angles. They're called complementary angles. That is, two angles that add up to 90 degrees, they're called complementary angles. So complementary angles are angles that add up to 90 degrees. That is, their measure adds up to 90 degrees. Okay, so far so good. Now, I'm also pretty sure that you know this particular angle. Here, I've drawn actually a line. A line, however, is like a straight angle. It's like a 180 degree angle, isn't it? Right? So a line is 180 degrees, and this angle, in fact, is called a straight angle. Okay? So a 180 degree angle is called a straight angle. If I could write that, that'd be great. Okay, I hope you know how to spell that because my pen here is kind of giving me a little difficulty. So 180 degree angles, they're called right angles. They're simply a line. So if I draw another line over here, interestingly, all right, and then I draw a ray starting from, let's say, over here. Now I've taken the straight angle and I have now cut it into two smaller pieces. Let's call this angle 1 and angle 2. But then you appreciate that angle 1 and angle 2, they would add up to 180 degrees, right? Because that's their, it's a straight line. So 180 degree angles, they're called straight angles. Now, if you have two angles that add up to straight angles, okay, and they're called supplementary angles. So supplementary angles. So supplementary angles are angles that add up to 180 degrees. So angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary angles. Supplementary angles are angles that add up to 180 degrees. So there we have it. So we're learning quite a few terms here, and many of these I'm sure are already familiar to you. And before we finish, I'd like to suggest a couple more things, okay? And that is this particular angle compared to this particular angle compared to this particular angle here, like this, okay? Now, the middle angle here is a 90 degree angle, but if I didn't tell you that, you cannot assume that. It looks kind of straight, 90 degrees, but you can't assume that unless you're specifically told that that is the case. Because it could be like 89.5 degrees, you know what I'm saying? But unless you're told, either by the symbol or if you're told explicitly that this angle is 90 degrees, then you can't assume that it's 90 degrees. But here I'm telling you that this is a 90 degrees. So this is a right angle. A right angle is an angle that is 90 degrees. Now this angle is smaller than an 90 degree angle, and this angle is called an acute angle. Okay, an angle that is less than 90 degrees is called an acute angle. And this angle over here, let's say I'm going to call it 120 degrees, this angle is called an obtuse angle. An obtuse angle is an angle that's greater than 90 degrees. So acute angle less than 90 degrees, right angle 90 degrees, and obtuse angle greater than 90 degrees. So those are three types of angles. All right. Now, the final thing I'd like to cover before I finish is as follows. Here I'm going to draw two lines over here, two intersecting lines, like this. And I could name these lines in different ways if you recall. Let's give them some lowercase letter, L and M. If you remember, you can name lines using lowercase letters like L and M. You can also name lines using points. So let's do that. Let's call that A. Let's call that point B right there. This point right here where they intersect, their point of intersection, we'll call that B. And this point right here is C. And let's call this point D. And let's call that point A, B, C, D, that B, point E. So I have here line L. And another way of saying that would be line D, E. Like this, and I put a little line symbol, or line BE would be equally correct. And then I have line M. Another way of saying the same thing is line AC, and line BC, or line CB would also be correct, etc. All right? So there's different ways of naming lines. Now, if I were to look at this carefully, You observe that there are 4 angles over here. There's one here. Okay, let's call that angle number 1. All right, this one here, and this is angle number 2, and that's angle number 3, and that's angle number 4. Correct? All right. So I have 4 angles over here. I've given them numerical names because sometimes, as you can see, it's kind of convenient just giving numerical names, right? So I also hope that you appreciate that angle 1 and angle 2, they add up to 180 degrees because a straight angle is 180 degrees. And if 2 angles add up to 180 degrees, they are called supplementary. So I can say angle 1 and angle 2, these are supplementary angles. Supplementary angles. Okay? They are supplementary. In the same way, angle 3 and angle 4 are supplementary, right? Angle 3 and angle 4 are supplementary. Correct? And then I have some special angles here. All right? And that's what I wanted to share with you. Angle 1 and angle 3, the opposite angles, so to speak, opposite of the point of intersection, they're given special names. So angle 1 and angle 3, these are called vertical angles. They're called vertical angles. Vertical. Angle 1 and angle 3 are vertical angles. You can also appreciate in the same way that angle 2 and angle 4 are vertical angles. Correct? So here we have 2 vertical angles and we have 2 supplementary angles as well. Actually, we have several pairs of supplementary angles. Can you see them? Here's one pair, here's another pair, here's another pair, here's another pair. Correct? So we have 4 pairs of supplementary angles, and then we have 2 pairs of vertical angles. All right? So we learned quite a bit today about angles, and I hope you appreciate it and mastered these basic terminology, and we shall continue from this next time. Until then, as-salatu was-salamu ala rasulillah, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum.